Over the last 18 months, the session has spent a great number of hours praying, inquiring, and discussing the direction God wants us to go as a church. The scriptures tell us that where there is no vision, the people are unrestrained. Without a clear understanding and agreement of why we are here as a church and what it is God wants us to focus on, we will be ineffective and disjointed. We know that God wants us to make disciples who worship God passionately, connect with God's people, and impact God's kingdom. We are not content to simply help people grow deeper in their knowledge of God. We want to see an army of Christians on mission for God who are grounded in the Word, who use their spiritual gifts to serve the bride of Christ, and who have a heart for the least and the lost of our community and our world. We believe a church that worships the God who gives us the gospel, a church that understands and applies the gospel to all areas of life, and a church that lives out the gospel mandate is an unstoppable force in our community. We want to be that kind of church. The more we surrender ourselves to the mission and mandate Christ has given us, the more we can expect to see God's hand of blessing, even in times of adversity and difficulty. As we have fleshed out who God wants us to be and the direction we should head, we have identified several important steps we need to take to achieve this vision. This DVD presents to you an overarching 10-year plan that the session believes will position Covenant to carry out our vision. The session is asking each of you to prayerfully watch and consider all that you will hear in this presentation. With this DVD, we provided question cards that you can turn in between now and January 21st. On January 23rd and January 24th, we will hold informational meetings that specifically answer the submitted questions you may have about this 10-year plan. On January 31st, we will conduct a congregational meeting where the session will ask you to approve by vote the overarching 10-year plan and to endorse the transitional steps the session believes we must immediately take to achieve this plan. As a church, we are land rich and space poor. The reason we are space poor or struggling with our existing facilities is that our buildings were designed to be multi-purpose in their nature. This multi-purpose philosophy has now resulted in current facilities that are overutilized. This overutilization and constant jockeying between ministry groups for space has a significant negative impact on a multitude of church ministries. Much ministry that needs to be done cannot be accomplished due to the overutilization of the facilities by very different groups of people. Multipurpose was the right approach 15 years ago when we were a small-sized church transitioning into a medium-sized church. But today, we must adopt a different philosophy in order to move from medium church mentality to large church mentality. The session recognizes that we must get facility relief immediately and travel the road that allows us to have dedicated ministry spaces so that we can worship, connect, and impact in the most effective way possible. Seeing the need, the session pulled together a land use task force who for 3 months studied needs and explored possible solutions. As a result of this assessment and our desire to position ourselves for God's continued blessing, the session believes that we need to build a sanctuary complex that accommodates 1,500 worshipers and which contains, first of all, an aesthetically and architecturally pleasing sanctuary designed and dedicated to its primary usage, which is worship. This complex must contain ministry spaces for our constituent ministries whose form follows their function and whose usage is dedicated to their primary audience. Finally, we must factor in adequate space for our staff offices and position ourselves for staff growth to effectively minister to our people and to the community. Why a dedicated sanctuary for worship? With a multi-purpose, multi-use building, we will never have a space that reflects both God's transcendence and His immanence. Let's start with transcendence. We need a sanctuary that moves us to worship the transcendent, holy, and awesome God, a place that reflects His beauty and grandeur. We need a church where silence and stillness before God is not only encouraged, but actually possible due to its architectural design. We must provide a sanctuary for our people where the common and everyday are kept at bay for at least a little while each week. A refuge for people where they can connect with God in deep worship. A setting where people can worship in awe of God. We all know how difficult it is to get good sound or create a particular ambiance in our current worship facility. You can only do so much acoustically or aesthetically in a gymnasium. We are at the stage where we should build an aesthetically beautiful sanctuary that reflects the eternal beauty of our God, a place where music and the arts and architecture and the spoken word all encourage us to glorify and worship God. While it is difficult to quantify, we are concerned that the common usage of the current worship center has a negative effect on our young people. The worship center has more sports than worship taking place and is more identified with basketball, volleyball, PE, and gym nights than worship. There is a great need to instill a sense of the sacred in our covenant children. To accomplish this goal, we need facilities that encourage the awe of God and a sense of worshipful decorum. The session also believes our community needs a church that emphasizes God's transcendence, since there are few churches in the area that do this. We believe a new sanctuary will attract new people who are looking for a worship experience that probes the sacred and the divine. The postmodern generation is suspicious of a church that feels like a shopping mall or a generic facility that resembles an office complex more than a church. Because they crave connection with historical forms and are seeking foundations they can identify with, many young adults are returning to or joining the Roman Catholic Church or other entities that feel like church. As important as it is that our sanctuary manifest the transcendence of God, our sanctuary must also allow for the immanence of God. We worship a personal, real, and loving God who we are in relationship with experientially. We need to connect with God emotionally and spiritually and walk out of our worship services knowing that we met with Him. Since we are created in the image of the immanent God, we are also hardwired with a need to connect and fellowship with other believers. Our sanctuary should have an area where we can linger over a cup of coffee and we can laugh with a Christian brother or sister. Areas where we can sit and fellowship with one another as we catch up on the week or spend some time in prayer with a friend who is burdened. A properly designed foyer, narthex, or commons area will allow us to fellowship before and after the service, yet not intrude on the transcendence of the auditorium where we worship. However, the session is not simply recommending a sanctuary for you to consider. It is a sanctuary complex. Don't miss that word complex. In addition to a suitable sanctuary that facilitates worship, we must create dedicated spaces that free our children, youth, and adult ministries to be appropriate for the size church that we believe God is calling us to be. We must design tot and children ministry areas that scream to young parents that we love and care for their babies and little ones. It is critical that we provide safe, worshipful, engaging, roomy, and creative environments that kids want to revisit and moms talk about when they get together with their friends at play dates and birthday parties. We want our young parents to proudly invite their seeking friends to our church, confident that our staff and facilities reinforce the message that at Covenant, we consider ministry to children a priority.